why don't we go ahead and take a look at an example package just to see how all these numbers hang together.
Okay.
So why don't you start me off at the estimated cost of attendance.
So let's say at the first institution we're looking at, the total cost of attendance is about $25,000. So that might break out to tuition of $11,000, a room and board or housing and food costs of about $10,000, an allowance for books, $2,000 a year, transportation, depending on where you're coming from, of about $1,000 a year, and maybe some other expenses that are unique to that institution that would add up to the $25,000 cost of attendance.
Great. And just to be clear, for the point you mentioned earlier, you may see on a financial aid letter just tuition, room, and board included.
That's right.
And if that's the case, you want to actually add in your own book allowance, transportation allowance, other allowance, because those are actually going to be costs that you're going to incur. And so you want them to you want to factor that in.
Exactly. The idea is that with the cost of attendance, you've got an understanding of the total costs of being at that institution. And your exact costs might be slightly different than someone else.
Okay. So we've got our cost of attendance here of $25,000. You mentioned some different types of scholarships. Why don't we put in some numbers here? From school, let's say $10,000. What would be a reasonable amount sort of from a Pell Grant? Let's say if a family had an income of around $50,000. What would be sort of a typical Pell Grant they might receive?
So a family at that income level, depending on what else is going on with the family, family size, how many family members in college, let's say that they would qualify for a $1,000 Pell Grant.
Okay, so we have a $1,000 Pell Grant. We'll go ahead and say there's a $3,000 grant from the state that this student has obtained. And then why don't we go ahead and also put in a $1,000 outside scholarship. And this is a scholarship that's not coming from the school itself. It probably won't be included on the financial aid letter unless you've already told them about it. But it is something you want to include here because these are your own calculations of what your costs are going to be. And one sort of side note is you do actually want to let the school know about those outside scholarships because it can have an impact on your financial aid. They want to understand your true cost of attendance. And if you've already gotten that scholarship, your cost of attendance is going to be a little bit lower.
That's right.
So we put in that $1,000. That gives us a total scholarship amount of, looks like $15,000. And so now, remind me again, how do I get to the net cost here?
So that net cost is going to be the difference between the $25,000 of cost of attendance minus the $15,000 of scholarships or free money that doesn't have to be paid back. So what this institution is actually going to cost you is $10,000.
Great. So $10,000 is what I'm responsible for on a
That's right.
yearly basis. That's not
That's
one
right.
time.
And
That's every year.
That's right. That's not saying that you have to come up with that cash all up front out of your pocket right away. There are options offered to help you come up with that $10,000, but that would be the annual cost to you.
Okay. And in this situation, why don't you give me what would be sort of reasonable work study and loan amounts that a school could offer?
So let's say a work study amount of $2,500. Which would allow you to work, less than 10 hours a week, I think is a really reasonable expectation. And then a loan amount of another $2,500. So there's $5,000 of that net cost that's taken care of between work study and student loans. So that leaves the family or the parents with $5,000 to cover of that total educational cost of $25,000.
And is that $5,000 going to be due right away? Like day one of school, they pay the $5,000, or when do you actually have to pay it?
Typically, no. It's usually paid, if it's a semester school, it would be half of it at the start of the year, half of it halfway through the academic year. So it depends on that school's academic calendar and their billing cycle.
Great. And the last question I have for you is, $5,000 for some families that may be completely doable, for others that may be far above what they can contribute.
The very first thing I would recommend to a family that's concerned about paying the expected family contribution that's showing up on their award letter is that they talk to the financial aid office and make sure that the financial aid office has taken everything into account, that family has the financial situation that they're facing. But after you've had that conversation, if you're looking at a parent contribution that you're going to need some help with, then it's time to start talking about additional loans.
Gotcha. And it looks like in this situation, you might be able to bump up the student's work study a
That's
little
right.
bit, or the student could take out sort of these low interest rate loans,
That's
which
right.
might be better options than the parent taking
Right.
out loans.
As a first year student, actually, from the Stafford loan program, a student can borrow up to $5,500. So that typically would be the first thing we would recommend to a student who's looking for some additional help.
Great. Is there anything else that I should be looking at when I'm understanding the different components of a financial aid package?
Well, I think it's critical that you identify the difference between scholarships and loans and work study that are being offered. Unfortunately, it's not always readily apparent from the information that you're receiving from the school. So make sure you understand what's a scholarship, what's a loan that has to be repaid, and what's work study. If you have any questions about that at all, go to the financial aid office to ask.
Okay, so students really need to kind of put this sheet together for themselves. It's not necessarily going to be handed to them on a silver platter.
That's right. I think that's the best thing to do, to make sure you understand what's going on with your financial aid and how much are you signing for in student loans, for example, to really understand the bottom line of what you're getting into.